Welcome to another edition of the ABSA Off-Road Championship. In this program, we bring you highlights of the Gold 400, which brought down the curtain on this year's ABSA Off-Road Championship.
The Gold 400 was the third new event on this year's ABSA Off-Road Championship calendar and took competitors to the West Rand in Gauteng. Race headquarters were at the Kloof Country Club in Glen Harvey, about 70 kilometers west of Johannesburg. With championships at stake, the Gold 400 provided for a tense and exciting end to the season, with the event also the final race to be held under the ABSA banner.
On the championship front, Team Castrol Toyota Per Force and Howie had an unassailable lead in the production vehicle title race, but the Premier SP Class Championship was up for grabs. Also in contention was the second Castrol Toyota Hilux crew of Taylor and Birkin and Ford Racing's Visser at Badenhorst.
Yeah, you know, the first part of the season was going really well. We won 3 races in a row, including the desert race, which is worth 1.5 points. So we had a really good lead. And then, you know, from then to the last third of the championship, we've been stumbling a little bit. But we've had 2 good results, and the car's really good. Our package is good, so we're confident we can do well this weekend.
4 manufacturers featured in the top 10 in the Production Vehicle Championship, where Foss and Howie couldn't be caught. For Anthony Taylor and Chris Birkin, the spur was to overtake Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst and make it a 1-2 for the Castrol Toyota team.
In his final race before retiring, veteran Hannes Grobler was all smiles when he drew number 1 on the road for the Donaldson Prologue to determine race grid positions. Second and third were Gary Bertholdt and Ralph Pitchford in the Atlas Copco Toyota Hilux, and Christian de Plooy and Henk Janse van Vieren in the second RFS BMW X3.
The Donaldson Prologue was run over a 60-kilometer route that took competitors from Wagterskop towards Hillshaven and the R28 road to Randfontein and Vereniging. The route then ran through Modderfontein Farm to the Peter Wright Dam and the finish near the N12 towards Simonia. The Prologue also produced something of a surprise with Gary Bertholdt and Ralph Pitchford upstaging the factory teams in the Atlas Copco Toyota Hilux. After a disappointing season, it was a boost for Bertholdt and Pitchford, with a pair 12 seconds clear of former South African champions Visser and Badenhorst in the Ford Racing Ranger.
Championship leaders Foss and Howie completed the podium positions with teammates Taylor and Birkin only 3 seconds in arrears in the second of the factory Team Castrol Toyota Hilux entries. The second Ford Racing Ranger of Lance Woolridge and Ward Huxtable filled out the top 5, with the Pietermaritzburg crew only 8 seconds clear of Grobler and Tersteege in the first of the RFS BMWs. Grobler and Tersteege had 23 seconds in hand over teammates de Plooy and Janse van Vieren, who earlier in the season won the Sun City 400. There were encouraging results for 2 privateer teams running ex-factory Ford Rangers. Bloemfontein crew Loder Brain and Rian Greling were 18 seconds adrift of de Plooy and Janse van Vieren in the Rubicon Ford Ranger, with the pair chased home by fellow Free Staters Kobus van Tonder and Freddie Kreel in the Unifreight Ford Ranger.
Recent rains in the area produced the odd muddy patch, with Terence Marsh and George Smalberger completing the top 10 in the Regent Racing Nissan Navara. In a tight finish, just 1 second separated Marsh and Smalberger and the international Toyota Hilux of outgoing South African champions Jannie Visser and Joks Leroux. Another second behind the Northwest crew was the SA Warranties Nissan Navara, crewed by Archie Rutherford and Protea cricket legend Jonty Rhodes. After fellow cricketer Fani de Villiers, rugby Springbok Stefan de Blanche and Paralympic swimming legend Natalie de Toy, the enthusiastic Rhodes was the 4th sports celebrity to have a taste of off-road racing alongside the experienced Rutherford.
After the dust had settled on the Donaldson Prologue, service crews swung into action to ready their chargers for battle the next day. After a frustrating season, an upbeat Gary Bertholdt was also happy with his second Prologue win of the season.
Yes, actually a very nice result. It's great to be on pole in SP. It's the second one for the season. I think, as everybody knows, the race isn't won on Friday, but it's definitely a good start, and I think it's a nice position to be starting from, and we can lead the SPs from there.
In the Donaldson Prologue results, just over a minute separated the first 5 crews, with 3 of them involved in SP Class Championship battle. BMW, Ford, Nissan and Toyota all featured in the top 10, with the scene set for drama.
Going into the Gold 400, the special vehicle and Class A title races were interestingly poised. 3 teams were in contention, with Motorride Racing Championship leaders Evan Hutchison and Dani Stassen slight favourites to win both titles.
You know, we went to the last race. I needed to finish ahead of Van Staden, and we did. We gave ourselves a comfortable gap on him. We come into this event with both either Du Plessis or Van Staden needing to win. They have to come first, and then I have to come worse than 4th place for them to take a victory. So it's a lot more difficult for them than it is for us. So I think we've all got a bit of pressure, all a little bit nervous. It's a big championship to win, and I want it bad. So we're going to give it our best.
The title chasers were a straight fight between Evan Hutchison and Dani Stassen, Atlas Copco crew of Johan van Staden and Mike Lawrenson, and brothers Lawrence and Gerard Du Plessis, who went into the race on the back of successive wins.
ABSA Off-Road Championship crews are divided into speed groups based on Donaldson Prologue results. The starting order for speed groups is rotated to level the playing field, with brothers Daniel and Lozili first car away on the Gold 400. Starting behind them were Steve Parker and VZ Van Sale, and Class P title contenders Richard Fuller and Dennis Murphy.
Production vehicle prologue winner Gary Berthold pointed out races are not won on a Friday, but Evan Hutchinson and Dani Stassen struck an early psychological blow in the special vehicle and Class A championship chases. The Motorite Bat Venom pair edged out Lawrence and Gerard Du Plessis, with the brothers 13 seconds in arrears in the Zarco Magnum, previously campaigned by outgoing South African champions Herman and Wichard Sulwald.
Class P championship leaders Colin Matthews and Alan Smith then did Evan Hutchison and Dani Stassen and the Du Plessis brothers a favour. Under pressure from Richard Fuller and Dennis Murphy in the Class P title race, Matthews and Smith finished third in the Century Racing CR3. More importantly for Hutchison, Stassen and the Du Plessis brothers was that Matthews and Smith finished ahead of title contenders Van Staden and Lawrenson with a 21-second advantage over the Atlas Copco Bat. Only 5 seconds behind Van Staden and Lawrenson was the PHB bat of Marius and Yolinda Fourie, with the husband and wife pairing 50 seconds ahead of father and son Nick and Ryan Harper in the second Motorite Bat Venom. Behind the Harpers, there was another steady performance from Bloemfontein-based Peter Ruthven and Leander Pinnard, with the Rubicon Bat completing the top 8.
With all 3 special vehicle and Class A championship contenders in the top 4 after the Donaldson Prologue, the plot was thickening. For the 3 crews involved, it was now white-knuckle time.
Yeah, if you're looking at the provisional results, all 3, the top 3 contenders is in line with one another, so it's going to be a fight all the way to the end. Kind of expected this type of result where the top 3 would mix themselves into the killing shots in the beginning. So it's going to be a very long and hard day tomorrow. Who's going to be the most disciplined. It's going to be the one taking it.
With a 43-second advantage over the Du Plessis brothers and 90 seconds in hand over Van Staden and Lawrenson, championship leaders Evan Hutchison and Dani Stassen had strengthened their hand. The same applied to Class P leaders Colin Matthews and Alan Smith.
Heavy overnight rain and persistent showers before the start of the race put a different complexion on proceedings. Game plans had to be reassessed, with the factory Ford Racing team cutting extra grooves on tyres. For some, the rain and the certainty of a wet and muddy route simply added to enjoyment.
It's going to be good fun. I like it when it's a little bit challenging, so I think it's going to be good fun.
Going to be a wet day.
You reckon?
Yep.
It's going to be very messy today. A lot of mud. Got to take this one very carefully, but it's going to be a good day.
There was plenty of tension on the start line, especially among the crews who were fighting for championships. It was going to be a long day, and it was evident right from the very start that traction was going to be a major problem out on the course.
The Du Plessis brothers also struggled to get off the line in the Zarco Magnum. As far as their championship hopes were concerned, the Wolmerand-Stud pair had to win, and chasing down Hutchison and Stassen wasn't going to be an easy task. With four-wheel drive, getting off the line was a little easier for Berthold and Pitchford in the Atlas Copco Toyota Hilux, and the all-wheel drive also helped Visser and Badenhorst get away ahead of Matthews and Smith after the crews posted identical prologue times. An interesting early battle was on the cards.
There were plenty of rocky patches along the route, with Hutchison and Stassen anxious to avoid flat tyres and adopting a cautious approach in the Motorite Bat Venom. Behind them, Lawrence and Gerard Du Plessis were a little more aggressive, but with their championship hopes resting solely on a victory, the brothers were forced into being more adventurous.
After a disappointing season with the pair hampered by reliability issues, Bertelt and Pitchford were anxious to build on their Donaldson prologue victory. The Atlas Copco Toyota Hilux crew started 12 seconds ahead of Visser and Badenhorst, with a victory a must item at the top of the agenda where the Ford Racing crew were concerned. Plenty of torque from the Ford Ranger's diesel engine was going to be an advantage in the conditions, and the pair were starting to pull away from Matthews and Smith, who were coming under pressure from Van Staden and Lawrenson in the Atlas Copco bat.
At the back of a little train of cars, the husband and wife team of Marius and Jolanda Fourie were hot on the heels of Johan van Staden and Mike Lawrenson. Ahead of the PHB bat, there was a change when Colin Matthews and Alan Smith moved over to let van Staden and Lawrenson through. The three special vehicle title contenders were now 1, 2 and 3 on the road, with the battle interestingly poised. Matthews and Smith were also under pressure from the Fouries, and after a brief skirmish between the two crews, the husband and wife combination relegated the Century Racing crew and Class P leaders to 5th overall.
After the Donaldson prologue, only 3 seconds separated Castrol Toyota Hilux teammates Duncan Foss and Rob Howie and Anthony Taylor and Chris Birkin. The two cars were running together, but with poor visibility thanks to a misty windscreen. Foss and Howie moved over to allow Taylor and Birkin to move into 3rd place amongst the production vehicles. The pair were now behind Gary Bertelt, Ralph Pitchford and championship rivals Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst. The second Ford Racing Ranger of Lance Woolrich and Ward Huxtable was chasing after the two Castrol Toyotas, and further up the road the Duplessis brothers were hit by the first of a litany of problems that blew them out of the Special Vehicle Championship water.
The Gold 400 was scheduled to be run over 2 laps of 170 kilometres, and the first 60 kilometres followed the course of the Donaldson prologue run the previous day. The big difference was a complete turnaround in the prevailing conditions.
Conditions in the early stage of the race were treacherous, with cars slipping and sliding all over the place. Helicopter footage showed overall leaders Evan Hutchinson and Donnie Stassen almost being caught out. With Lawrence and Gerard Duplessis temporarily out of action, Johan van Staden and Mike Lawrenson had moved into 2nd in the Atlas Copco bat and had championship leaders Hutchinson and Stassen in their sights. Behind them, and 42 kilometres into the race, there was a little skirmish going on between new production vehicle leaders Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst, with the Ford Ranger being overtaken by Marius and Jolanda Fourie.
Class P championship leaders Colin Matthews and Alan Smith had been chasing the Ford Ranger of Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst right from the beginning. With the Ford stationary on the side of the road, Matthews and Smith decided to ease their way around Visser and Badenhorst. They temporarily beached the Century Racing CR3, and when it was again all systems go for the two crews, the Ford Ranger was back in front again, with Matthews and Smith sliding around in their wake.
A little further up the road in the production vehicle pecking order, the two Castrol Toyota Hiluxes maintained their positions, with Taylor and Birkin still in front of Duncan Foss and Rob Howie, and second among the production vehicles behind the Ford Ranger of Visser and Badenhorst. After starting the day 3 seconds apart, there was now a small gap between the two Castrol Toyotas, with Lance Woolrich and Ward Huxtable building up a head of steam in the second of the Ford Racing Rangers as they chased after Foss and Howie.
In their last race before heading into retirement, veterans Grobler and Ter Steege were a solid 5th in the production vehicle category in the RFS BMW X3. Right behind them, the motorized bat of the father and son team of Nick and Ryan Harper was the meat in an RFS BMW sandwich, with Christian de Ploy and Henk Janssen van Vieren also running strongly in the second of the RFS BMW entries. They were ahead of Kobus van Tonder and son-in-law Freddie Kriel, who dropped a place to Terence Marsh and George Smallberger.
Van Tonner was also concerned that all was not well with the Unifreight Ford Ranger.
Harry Smith based Van Tonder and Kriel then played a game of follow my leader behind Terence Marsh and George Smallberger before they strayed slightly off the route.
The Unifreight Ford was almost hit by South African champions Jannie Visser and Yorks Leroux, with the international Toyota crew involved in a little duel with Class P pairing of Fuller and Murphy in the Regent Racing bat. Ahead of them, there was a moment of indecision from Terence Marsh and George Smalberger. Fuller and Murphy disappeared up the wrong road, whilst Visser and Leroux nipped in front of the Regent Racing Navara. Fuller and Murphy then reappeared on the right road, but were now stuck behind their Regent Racing teammates, and Visser and Leroux, who weren't likely to be in a charitable mood.
On board now with Marsh and Smalberger, who looked to be struggling with a technical issue. It did not take Fuller and Murphy long to go past their teammates, with outgoing special vehicle champions Herman and Wichert Sowald next to go steaming past the Regent Racing Navara. They were followed by Eduardo and Ricardo Agazi from the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
The final straw was when the pair were also passed by Whitehouse and Carlson in the second Regent Racing Nissan Navara.
Not far into the race, steering problems hampered Donaldson Prologue winners and early production vehicle leaders Gary Berthold and Rolf Pitchford. The Atlas Copco Toyota had dropped back to 12th place and was now under pressure from the two Regent Racing Nissan Navaras. Free State crew Loder Brain and Rian Greyling were having a few problems deciding which way they wanted to go in the Rubicon Ford Ranger and lost precious time while making up their minds.
De Bruyn and Greyling were being chased by Rutherford and Rhodes, who suffered a minor mishap when the SA Warranties Nissan Navara slid gently into a tree, which had jumped into the road.
The experienced Rutherford and Rhodes were quickly on their way again, but a tricky section of the route also caught out Class B leaders Tony and Michael Gouveia in the Gearbox Services bat. The father and son team were busy extricating themselves from an awkward situation when Daniel Brooks and Gavin Gray arrived on the scene in the Ducatis property bat. The KwaZulu-Natal crew were held up for a few moments while the Gouveias sorted themselves out. After dominating Class B in the Northern Region Championship, the Gouveias were making their national championship debut.
A spectator-friendly course offered off-road enthusiasts plenty of viewing points, and after leaving the prologue route, competitors headed towards Jachtfontein. The route then crossed the R28 road to Vereeniging and headed towards Sebokeng.
The race had now turned into something of a free-for-all, with some dramatic helicopter camera work picking up a mixed bag of production and special vehicles running line astern. Back on terra firma, Taylor and Birkin led Matthews and Smith, who had Woolridge and Huxtable on their tail. Next up were Force and Howie and Van Staden and Lawrenson in the Atlas Copco bat. Chasing after them were Grobler and Ter Steege in the RFS BMW, while early special vehicle leaders Evan Hutchison and Dani Stassen had dropped back to third in the special vehicles.
Back to the helicopter at 104 kilometers into the route, and now matters got a little crazy. Alle, the Keystone Cops. Cars backtracking after staying off course met up with cars on the correct route, and from the air, it could have been a circuit race as crews jockeyed for positions.
It was helter-skelter stuff with cars chasing each other in line astern. Sections of the route opened up to allow cars to build up a head of steam, and it was flat-out racing in tricky conditions.
Leading the pack through a tunnel of tall grass were a trio of SP class entries with Castrol Toyota pairing of Anthony Taylor and Chris Birkin ahead of the Lance Woolrich and Ward Huxtable combination and the RFS BMW of Grobler and Ter Steege. Next up, and being sprayed with mud and water, were the open cockpit special vehicles of Matthews and Smith, Hutchison and Stassen, and Van Staden Lawrenson, with the second Castrol Toyota of Duncan Foss and Rob Howie completing a high-speed train of SP class buckies and special vehicles.
The final section of the first loop of the race saw cars heading back towards the N12 road to Potchefstroom en route to the designated service point at Kloof Country Club Glen Harvey for a compulsory 15-minute halt. At the front of the production vehicle field, there had been another change. The Ford Racing pair of Lance Woolridge and Ward Huxtable had charged ahead of the Castrol Toyota Hilux of Anthony Taylor and Chris Birkin. A little further back, there had been a change among the special vehicles, with Evan Hutchison and Donnie Stassen back in front in the motorbike Bat Venom. With around 25 kilometers to go before the compulsory stop at Kloof Country Club, Hutchison and Stassen had Grobler and Tristierge on their tail in the RFS BMW, with Force and Howie now running fourth among the production vehicles in the second of the Castrol Toyota entries.
The top 5 among the production vehicles was completed by youngsters Christian de Plooy and Henk Janse van Vieren in the second of the RFS BMW X3s. They had Class P leaders Colin Matthews and Alan Smith chasing them before the Century Racing crew picked up a puncture that brought a temporary halt to their progress. Marius and Yolinda Fourie now found themselves in second place amongst the special vehicles in the PHB Bat, with the husband and wife pair running just ahead of South African champions Jannie Visser and Joks Leroux, who had made steady progress in the international Toyota Hilux.
Waar gaan Chris nou? U-turn rechts. Moet ek opgaan? Ja. Hy wys jy moet terug aan pad toe en opgaan, ja. Skerp links hierso.
There was still plenty of chit-chat going on between Cobus van Tonder and Freddie Kriel, but they were having a steady run in the Unifreight Ford Ranger and were now being caught by the factory Ford Ranger of Visser and Badenhorst, who lost time with a puncture. Marsh and Smallberger looked to have settled into a rhythm in the Regent Racing Nissan Navara, but it was the end of the road for Lance Woolridge and Ward Huxtable, with an encounter with a rock ripping out the Ford Ranger's rear suspension.
Also out of the running were special vehicle title contenders Van Staden and Lawrenson, and with the conditions taking their toll, KZN crew of Daniel Brooks and Gavin Gray were a surprise third amongst these special vehicles in the Ducatis Bat. Behind them, a scintillating performance had taken Mark Corbett and Rudy Belzer from the back of the grid into fourth place in Class A, with the Century Racing pair scything their way through the field.
The Castrol Toyota of Anthony Taylor and Chris Birkin were first into the designated service park, with cars arriving thick and fast. While crews grabbed some refreshment, service crews swung into action with the pits a hive of frantic activity. At the halfway stage in the production vehicle category, Anthony Taylor and Chris Birkin led Hannes Grobler and Henny Tristierge by 1 minute and 40 seconds, and back in fifth place SP class title hopes were fading for Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst.
On the special vehicle front, Evan Hutchison and Donnie Stassen had taken a tight grip on the championship. Johan van Staden and Mike Lawrenson were out of the race, and Lawrence and Gerard du Plessis had fallen off the radar and were out of the top 10. Colin Matthews and Alan Smith had fought their way back to second overall and were in charge of the Class B championship in the Century Racing CR3.
Into the final loop of the race, and Taylor Birkin and Forsen Howie had a tight grip on a Castrol Toyota 1-2 that would see Forsen Howie add the SP class title to their overall production car championship success.
In the special vehicle category, it was turning out to be plain sailing for Evan Hutchinson and Donnie Stassen, with the pair cruising towards the overall and Class A championship in the Motorrad Bat Venom. Behind Hutchinson and Stassen, there had been a change amongst the production vehicles, with Christian de Plooy and Henk Janse van Vieren moving into third place in the RFS BMW X3. Marius and Yolinda Fourie were having a good day in the PHB Bat after being delayed by a herd of cattle who were to come under some late pressure, though, from the Class P leaders Colin Matthews and Alan Smith, who had a lock-on and overall podium finish. The drive of the day had taken Mark Corbett and Rudy Belzer from 46th on the road at the start into 4th overall amongst these specials and 3rd in Class A in the Century Racing CR4.
There was a flurry of activity among the production vehicles when SA champions Jannie Visser and Joks Leroux stormed past the Unifreight Ford Ranger of Cobus van Tonder and Freddie Kriel. A mistake then saw Visser and Leroux hand the place back to Kriel and van Tonder, but for both crews, 4th and 5th were their best performances of the season. A late puncture cost Hannes Grobler and Henny Tersteege a possible podium finish in their last outing and relegated them to 6th overall. KwaZulu-Natal pair Clint Gibson and Gary Campbell completed the top 5 among the special vehicles in the Gibson Racing Porter, while a disappointing 7th for Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst put paid to the Ford Racing Crew's SP Class Championship hopes. Behind them, another KZN crew in Daniel Brooks and Gavin Gray enjoyed their best result in the Ducatis bat since joining the Absa National Series midway through the year.
Perseverance paid off once again for Terence Marsh and George Smalberger in the Regent Racing Nissan Navara, and another good run saw brothers Daniel and Lo Zili finishing in the points for the 3rd race in a row after starting 48th on the grid in the Orange Works Porter. There was a top 10 finish for the ever-improving Botswana driver Mogre Mabili and Zelda Niemand, and their best performance of the season gave youngsters Jason Venter and Vincent van Alleman the Class D win and 9th overall in a battered 4x4 Mega World Toyota Hilux. In his debut as a driver in the Absa Series, German national Jürgen Schroeder was rewarded with a top 10 place with Gerard Skitter in the SP Laser Nissan Navara.
All that remained was for Anthony Taylor and Chris Birkin to seal their first win of the season, with Duncan Force and Rob Howie completing a 1-2 for the Castrol Toyota team. By winning both the overall and SP class titles, Force and Howie also broke a drought and gave the factory Castrol Toyota team their first national titles in more than a decade. The season also ended on a high note for Christian de Plooy and Henk Janssen van Vieren, and in their final race, veterans Hannes Grobler and Henny Tersteege were 6th overall.
A win on the Donaldson Prologue, the race, a victory and wrapping up the special vehicle and Class A titles provided Motorite Racing pair of Evan Hutchinson and Donnie Stassen with the perfect weekend. The final results saw Hutchinson and Stassen finish over 4 minutes clear of the husband and wife pairing of Marius and Yolinda Fourie, and a podium finish also gave Century Racing pair of Colin Matthews and Alan Smith the Class B title ahead of the Regent Racing crew of Richard Fuller and Dennis Murphy.
Next week on Inside Off-Road, a full bag as we meet Jonty Rhodes, take a look at the Dakar Rally and look back on 11 years of the Absa Off-Road Championship.